have Mr. Rahul Sood, Managing Director, India, BBC Global News, and Ms. Sally Wu, Research Director, Audience and Business Insights, Asia Pacific, BBC Global News. She's joining us from Taiwan. Welcome, both of you, to this webinar. Before I proceed, I just want to say that we are live on Exchange for Media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. We have the last 15 minutes for Q&As. You can tweet using hashtag E4M webinar. You can also send us questions on Zoom, on the social media platforms. So before I formally hand it over to Rahul, I just want to introduce briefly what would be the top points today that would be covered in this webinar. Both Rahul and Sally, they will be talking about the importance of building trust with consumers during this crisis that we are facing. They'll be also talking about, especially Rahul will touch upon this, the importance of brand building and fostering advocacy in a downturn. Sally will talk about the research that BBC has done and what it means and what has gone behind it. So it's an interesting discussion. A lot of, we're expecting a lot of questions towards the end. Without any further ado, I would like Rahul to take over and start his presentation. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Rohil, and we want to really thank all the entire team at Exchange for Media. And a very good afternoon to all of you, and from Sally and I, and both of us are delighted to be here. I think the aim of this short presentation we have for you today on a Tuesday afternoon really is to answer three key questions, which we think are actually very, very relevant to marketers, agencies, and publishers in the current economic environment that all of us are operating in. And I think, I'm sure all of us have some point or the other discussed, should brands really be advertising during a downturn? And if they do, is hard news an effective environment to be advertising in? And from our perspective, we would really be laying out facts, figures, and research to show you that actually hard news is a very effective environment to be advertising in. Like all of us know, really whatever's transpired over the last 4 months, news viewership, not just in India, but across the world, has really been peaking literally month on month. I mean, from the month of, middle of March, right through April, and I think most of May, I think the kind of viewership that news channels in India and for a service like us at the BBC globally has been completely unprecedented in terms of both digital and television viewership. So for us, I think this was a great opportunity in terms of getting all the additional eyeballs. And from our perspective, we would have also actually preferred if brands and marketers had looked at things the same way. And one of the first questions then why we really want to kind of tackle in this short presentation really is, why should brands continue advertising during this downturn? So from our perspective, what we really wanted to share with you is that as we are now sitting in the middle of July, I think most parts of the world, including in India, lockdowns are in retreat, and most economies are tentatively trying to come back on their feet. And while that is really good news for all of us, I think one of the immediate issues that marketers and brands are facing is, how do we navigate through this challenging economic environment? And an environment that is it's almost predicted that we are going to be going through a protracted global downturn. So in this environment, really, these are some of the questions that many brands and marketers are asking themselves. From our perspective, when the COVID pandemic really reared its ugly head more towards the end of February, early March, I think in India it was more like middle of March when suddenly things turned, and the lockdown announcements towards, I think, the 18th or 20th of March was the first date, and then we got into the whole extended lockdown starting the 23rd, 24th of March. I think most of us as news publishers and actually as content providers, I think the repercussions for that were felt fairly immediately. I mean, as you can see on some of the slides, the numbers are there. Almost more than half the brands immediately ended up postponing their advertising spends. And at the same time, even existing campaigns were pulled, they were blocked. There was, I think the whole fear psychosis had set in, where people, I think, didn't want to kind of have any campaigns running in a so-called bad news COVID-related environment here. And I think that is kind of what we call fairly normal human knee-jerk reaction. And I think all of us were consumed by it. I think it took us a while to really grapple with the scale of the problem, what it really is. And this was truly global in nature. So it was not something that was confined to one part of the world. It was in fact a moving problem. It started off in Asia, China. I think really when it hit Southern Europe, especially Spain and Italy, is when all of us in India really woke up to that reality. And thereafter, as we saw, it moved into the US, primarily New York. And at the same time, cases started building up in other parts of the world, the UK, obviously India. I think cases also started building up. And I think that's really where a lot of things, we were grappling with a lot of information coming in on literally a daily basis. And I think news players like us at the BBC were really at the forefront of it, trying to make sense of it all. So from our perspective, what we really have found that we've done multiple research studies over the years, and during this pandemic as well, which really showed us that if brands are able to stay the course and continue to market themselves during an economic downturn, I mean, those are the brands which are able to recover quickly and in fact are able to enjoy even greater business success in the long run. And we've done enough studies, as I said. We in fact did a study with content. We did a poll actually in Southeast Asia with Content 360, which really came through during this time. Just moving on to the next slide, basically just a second, please. Sorry, I think I'm on the. Sally, if you can just go back to the previous slide, if you can, please. Yes. Thanks, Sally. So thereafter, I guess, as I said, we basically looked at what brands were going to be doing during this time, and I think, as I said, the immediate reaction really was to pull back, play safe, just in a wait and watch environment, and thereafter take decisions as to how do we move forward. So some of the research findings that we really wanted to share with you really will, I think, give you some insights as to what brands and really what brands have done in some other parts of the world, and what really has come through during our research findings as well. So when the COVID-19 pandemic really gained some momentum, I think what we really, just give me a second actually. So what really history has shown us was that whenever there are cuts in marketing budgets, I mean, I don't think that really does, they do not really reflect what consumer spending really is all about during that time. In fact, some of the research we did during the last so-called global recession, which was more like 2008, 2009, I think there was a drop of almost 5.5% in consumer marketing spending. But overall, what we did find is that consumer spending actually did go up during that period. And I think within 2 years of that time frame, while advertising spending did come back and reach 6.5%, we found that actually consumer spending went up by almost 9% during that period of 2010, 2011, which was effectively just 2 years after the recession of 2008, 2009. Thereafter, basically, what we wanted to just share with you is that really where we've talked about absolute spends during a downturn. But let's examine, really some of the actual share of voice that we can get and how it can determine some long-term success in terms of trying to, and I'll actually probably use a case study which will probably highlight some of the things a little better. This following table over here, which will give you really three kind of equal sized groups of brands from the period of 2008-9. And each of these brands is really differentiated by their media investment strategies, which was actually then measured by the excess share of voice that they managed garnering. And really the share of voice difference between brands and the brand share of market really gives you a sense that while group one, which really highlights that the share of voice was 0 or even less, and but they were still advertising. In fact, they did not go dark. They actually experienced negligible profit or growth post-recession. While the third group, which actually had over 8% share of voice, saw actually the recession as an opportunity and achieved getting significant, I think, an upswing in sales and profit levels, which were actually much in excess of their traditional share of voice that they managed garnering. So I think it really goes to show that where you are able to go ahead and stay firm with your existing strategies, you are able to achieve the end results of getting the additional kind of impact on your business and building further shares, market shares for your brand. In fact, what we also did find is that one of the casualties during the downturn always seems to be brand building campaigns. While at the front end of it, it seems sensible for brands and agencies to focus on media channels that deliver scalable reach and conversion during tough times. I think really the fixation that gets ignored is the economic reality of brand value and the role that really quality media can play during, to build brands during such times. In fact, some research we did with Ubiquity in 2018 highlighted the disproportionate and probably the much ignored contribution that brands deliver to overall sales. And as per some data that we were again able to cull out, almost 30% of any business's sales are directly attributable to a brand's KPIs, which effectively is its image, its personality, its PR, its word to mouth. That really is effectively 5x higher contribution or attribution that can be delivered by media alone. And that can have an upside of almost 6 to 8% towards sales. So really, I think it goes to show that, we really, during a so-called downturn pandemic, if you are able to stay the course, the results are there for everybody to see in the foreseeable future. It's also actually proven that advertising benefits from the positive brand attributes in media environment in which they feature. The stronger attributes of media can easily be transferred actually to an advertiser. And as the previous slide demonstrated the importance of building brands during this time. Here we will give you really how an effective and a quality news environment, I think we cannot stress on the importance of brand safety and the quality of the news environment. I think especially because of the news environment we are operating currently in India. And I think we've seen the global backlash happening on, against the whole social media companies on stopping the hate campaign. And you've got a similar news environment in India where you've got, slogans like no profiteering from hate running. So I think from our perspective, for a brand to really build trust, if we are able to, for brands are able to actually position in themselves and actually use quality, trusted news brands to build their own brand, I think that you see that there's a sizable rub-off effect which the brands are also able to build on. I think with news having become what it did over the last 4 months, and actually with the story continuing to play out, we foresee that, I think with the nature of the conversation being so topical, I think viewers are able to, identify and grasp and actually build trust in brands which have actually been promoting themselves fairly actively during this time as well. Lastly, of all the brand attributes to focus on today, in today's climate, as I touched upon in my last slide, I mean, fake news and misinformation is unfortunately the reality we are living in. And I think brand trust then becomes so critical. And I think, again, as I said, I keep using the examples because I think especially the US and India, I think we're probably mirror images of each other in terms of the news environment both countries are operating in. So I think if people are going to be trusting you, they will pay more attention to your brands and marketing and communication efforts during a time like this when they themselves are looking for, brand attributes which emphasize trust and credibility and impartiality. So I think and if your customers are able to trust you, I think that is really the biggest thing, and the emotional connect that comes with it. I think it's almost proven through all our specific brand buys that we are likely to buy products and services and brands which almost twice or thrice as much if there is that whole emotional and a brand and a trust connect with that brand. The loyalty levels are obviously higher, and that's really what we really want to further kind of emphasize that really I think trust is the ultimate thing that I think any marketer or any brand really is going to be targeting in the entire journey. Yeah. So now I think coming back to the second aspect of this presentation, is hard news an effective environment? And I think some of the I think just some of the cliches or some of the concerns and scares which many brands and marketers had, as we will kind of share with you, was a little kind of ill-founded in terms of whether the hard news environment really is an environment to kind of work within or not. And I think we will kind of briefly answer that question to you, that actually hard news is a very effective advertising medium during this time. Some of the recent studies that we've done with Neuro Insight Research and IAB, which was actually conducted in Australia, actually reveals the effectiveness of a quality news environment in driving and anchoring brand recall. And I think the above two charts actually tell you that when you advertise during a hard news environment, what we've had in the last 4 months visibly during normal news environment, I think the impact on the memory recall for a brand is much higher during a hard news environment. And I think that's where we found that the audiences are much more engaged with the current environment of hard news content. And with this engagement benefit, we really would emphasize that I think more and more advertisers should make themselves present during this environment. Because at the end of the day, we feel that, viewers actually are much more emotionally connected during this time. And, they are consuming content, which is obviously stirring up, I think, higher emotions. They're watching content for slightly longer duration as well. And I think it helps in really, almost those brands getting embedded into their memories as we go forward. Yeah. So just moving on to the next slide then, how does this translate into a more effective campaign for brands? I think what we did at the BBC, we took an exercise actually last year, 2019, where researching engagement by content across a range of advertising partners on BBC World News as well as on bbc.com. And we found actually pretty similar results, that campaigns that ran mostly during our news content actually outperformed those that ran during the non-news content across a range of various brand attributes. So really that I think came through very, very clearly. And I think that's really the aspect of some of the findings which we were going to be sharing. And I think my colleague Sally, who's also here, would be happy to share some of how quality news makes an impact in campaign effectiveness. And some of the studies that we've taken, I think Sally would be more than happy to share some of those results with you during the latter part of this presentation. And I think we'll get more insights from some of these findings, and you'll see how it's really panned out for us. So Sally, over to you, and if you can just walk them through the research findings that we've got through on this.
Certainly. Thank you, Rahul. In the rest of today's session, I will be sharing with you our new research and case studies. This includes India consumer sentiments and outlook, as well as campaign effectiveness results. And the results from our proprietary neuroscience tool, and all of those will help us make sense of the relationship between consumers and news media in the time of crisis, we hope. Before I start with our research results, I want to bring your attention to this news consumption trend provided by ComScore. Between May 2019 and 2020, which is the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, ComScore has recorded a double-digit growth in total views in India. And this is for the entire news information category in billions, what you are seeing on the slide. In March 2020, BBC.com received close to 180 million unique browsers in India. And during a crisis, we know credible news media is the place people turn to obtain the latest updates. Not just on digital media, of course. For example, we saw a 30% increase in viewership for the BBC World News channel, according to BARC India. And how is their relationship with news evolving? This is about consumers' relationship with news. When we ask our audience about their news consumption pattern change before and after the pandemic, 59% said that they are now consuming more international news because of the COVID-19 situation. This news consumption shifts in national markets like India and Australia are actually higher than what we have seen globally and across APAC. Frequent travelers rely on news for tips on traveling sustainably, and they're interested to read articles and watch videos on news platforms about top destinations to travel to once the pandemic is over. Another research that we have seen published by Global Web Index is that 72% of Indian respondents say that they feel optimistic about the global economic outlook. However, those who feel very optimistic about the global economic outlook based on the latest research released by Global Web Index actually declined by 30% between June and April. How do news consumers feel about advertising right now? According to the BBC Global Minds research, more than 2 in 3 audience believe that brands should support news or journalism by advertising. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic is a true test for mankind. I think you will agree with me, because no one is immune. The crisis has changed the way we look at the world and provided a chance for us to re-examine our immediate surroundings. Gen Z consumers, for example, are interested in finding out how to live more sustainably after the lockdown and giving back to their community in return. The majority of us agree that brands are expected to show compassion to strike the right tone during this time. So working with an experienced commercial production team is also crucial, because you don't want to send the wrong message during this sensitive time. One question that we've been asking frequently is the concern that the latest news coverage would negatively impact clients' campaign results. In order to assess this, we looked into the BBC Ad Score results, which is a tool that we use to track cross-platform campaign effectiveness. We've been using the tool for the past decade. And we use the same set of quantitative and qualitative advertising effectiveness, and we put it on the 11 campaigns that were active on BBC platforms during March and April of this year. And we compare the results to our historical survey benchmarks that we have collected. I believe the benchmark we used was from the past 3 years. And the campaigns in the test came from various sectors, as what you see on the slide: finance, telco, banking, luxury, technology, airline. And because 60% of the sample are actually made out of senior managers, it's also a good tool to evaluate B2B campaigns. What we have found out is that the campaign performance was on average 6 to 9% higher than the benchmarks that we have gotten before the pandemic. For example, 60% of the respondents said that they feel positively towards the brands they saw on the campaign, compared to 79% before the pandemic. 85% of the respondents say that it made them want to find out more about the brand after seeing the campaign, compared to 78% before the pandemic. Brand recommendation also scored higher than our historical benchmarks. 2 in 3 people said that they would recommend the brand they saw in the campaign, while 22% more respondents said that they are very likely to recommend a brand compared to the results they saw before the pandemic. Marketeers know that brands benefit from halo effect, being associated with quality and trusted publishers and media channels. Trusted news platforms attract and return quality consumers, leading to a higher level of content consumption and engagement. Therefore, we're curious to find out if the same also applied to the times that we are in during the crisis. From the S-score results that I just showed you, the answer seems to be yes. But what made these campaigns effective and delivered higher affinity scores than normal times? In order to answer these questions, we tap into our neuroscience toolkit to find out why. So how did we do the study? We incorporated 3 types of neuroscience techniques: facial coding, eye tracking, and implicit association testing. We used a control and exposed approach and recruited about close to 2,000 samples across 3 markets in the region: Singapore, Australia, and India. We've gotten about 750 respondents from India alone. We then exposed 9 different test groups to 1 piece of video content each. While watching the video content, respondents' facial expression are recorded via the webcam from their laptop or mobile phone. The control group samples, on the other hand, did not get to see any video content. This study approach is from our proprietary neuroscience methodology called the science of engagement. Here, I want to show you a short video clip to tell you more about the methodology behind the science of engagement.
Welcome to the science of engagement. Content-led marketing is big business, but tracking how effective it is has been difficult. Normally, it's done by asking people what they think or monitoring what they do. But that doesn't necessarily tell us why they're behaving the way they are. Just imagine if we could find out how they actually feel. Well, that's exactly what we've managed to do. Using innovative facial tracking software, we exposed 5,000 people from around the world to content-led marketing. And by using webcams to track their facial muscles, we were actually able to measure their emotions. All emotional responses are a combination of 6 different core states. So by analyzing their responses, we found out how they truly felt about what they were seeing. And the results are fascinating. Consumers really engage with content-led marketing, and the better it's done, the more positive the response is likely to be. People are far more receptive to the content when brands are transparent about their involvement. Content-led marketing can be as trusted and persuasive as editorial content, as long as it's clearly labeled at the outset. Add the value of a quality environment, such as the BBC, and consumers really start to embrace both the content and the brand. Content-led marketing is bringing brands audiences closer together more than ever before. We've always suspected that that would be the case. But now, we've proved it.
So what you just saw was a video we produced when we launched the Science of Engagement Toolkit a few years back. What we have added since was the facial, in addition to facial coding and implicit association task, was the eye tracking, so that we know when people were looking at certain place in the frame, what they feel actually at the moment. And of course, this research was originally conducted to evaluate the engagement for branded content. But in this case, we are changing the stimuli and use the COVID-19 news coverage as the content to test. So how we actually did it was that we used the BBC News homepage as our test environment. What you're seeing on the slide are the actual stimuli we use for our study, where a banner ad and a pre-roll video set in situ on the web page with the COVID-related news coverage. A major commercial challenge to credible news organizations is to convince brands the relevance and importance of advertising around bad news content. In this case, we're talking about COVID, but similar results can apply to other negative news stories. Quality news content about any major news events create a deepened engagement and heightened emotional response in user, while making them more receptive to the advertised content. By working directly with publishers, brands have access to news environment without compromising brand safety, which is a very important point to point out. In the following case studies in which we tested campaign from our client in India, Madhya Pradesh Tourism, we aimed to examine content and brand engagement, sentiment, response to brand attributes, and other advertising metrics. These results were freshly collected during the peak of the COVID lockdown period, and let's look at the results. Attention level to the test stimuli was high, with ample attention paid to the campaign assets. An elevated sense of empathy was actually registered from the short video from the COVID news about Sydney, Australia's beach closure due to the pandemic. The test with the Madhya Pradesh Tourism banner received a 78.5% attention score. For example, at this frame that you are looking at on the screen, the amount of attention increased at the second was in the top 10 percentile. One thing I did notice from evaluating our facial coding results from 9 different task groups was that there is a general sense of seriousness from the respondents across 3 different markets, Australia, Singapore, and India. We suspect that most people are feeling sad and down during this time. However, we must remember one key findings from our Science of Engagement thought leadership study. That is, to brand marketeers, there is no such thing as a bad emotion. Emotional intensity is a good thing, regardless of the emotional label. If the content triggers little emotion, it means the respondents feel indifferent. In that case, it's not efficient. In fact, many academic research have indicated that serious emotion is a strong driver for brand memory. Any heightened emotional intensity is in fact a good sign of engagement. In the Madhya Pradesh pre-roll created by the BBC Storyworks production team, we witnessed that the fast-paced montage of various animal shots built up to a climax of emotional engagement. This is followed by a full-screen shot of the Madhya Pradesh tourism logo, making its appearance at the optimal window of memory with encoding. Why do I say that? Because in 2018, we did another thought leadership study called the Science of Memory. we've learned that there is this golden window of an optimal branding moment, which happens seconds after an elevated emotional uplift. From a series of brainwave studies that we had conducted, this is the time that visual and audio cues get deeply encoded into our long-term memory. And these memorable points belong to the advertiser itself. Keep in mind, the pre-roll isn't it in isolation, but within the quality news environment where all the positive brand attributes are present. The positive impact to the Maya-Pradesh campaign can also be seen from the response to their brand image statement. Comparing the results from the exposed to the control samples, there are double-digit differences across the board. You can see from the result that both groups of respondents agree very much that travelers can enjoy a relaxing environment in Madhya Pradesh. But after seeing the campaign on bbc.com, more people agree that Madhya Pradesh is an undiscovered tourism destination with many unspoiled attractions. And of course, you may be cynical and say, well, people can lie in answering surveys, but we all know that our subconscious minds don't lie. What you are looking at here is the results from the implicit association shift. In this test, we measure responses to brand attributes as well as speed to the response among the control and the exposed groups. What you're seeing on the slides are the percentage of respondents that show a strong association to each of the statements you see on this slide. Among the control groups who did not see the Madhya Pradesh pre-roll featured on BBC News homepage, the words happening and luxury destination did not stand out. However, the vivid and colorful pre-roll played on a premium quality news publisher had successfully enhanced this particular traits in the task groups. For brands like Madhya Pradesh, there's a near 100% total awareness in India. I think it should be right for me to say that. What's difficult is to gain that top of mind awareness against the other states, so that Madhya Pradesh becomes first to mind when people think about planning for that dream holiday once the lockdown is lifted. From the research results, we see that this Madhya Pradesh campaign increased 28% of top of mind awareness and 14% of purchasing intent. Now, to summarize my findings, our study results from the peak of the COVID lockdown did not show negative impact towards brands from the consumers. Comparing campaign effectiveness results before and during the pandemic, we actually saw campaigns perform better among qualitative measurements and recommendation index. Engagement level and attention scores paid to the brand message sitting in situ of BBC News homepage remained high. Quality news environment will enhance brand attributes regardless of the context. So now I'm going to shift the screen back to Rahul to end our presentation.
Thank you so much, Sally. I appreciate all the insights from your end. I'm sure all the people who've actually joined us today in the afternoon, I'm sure many of them will have questions, queries, thoughts, comments on what we really walked them through over the last, I think, half an hour, 40 minutes. I think from our perspective, to really summarize, I think the news consumption as well as brand engagement that needs to happen during a time of a crisis like this. It's with quality news publishers, I think, who are providing them a compelling environment to kind of deliver your brand message. And I think really to basically the audience engagement that a news provider is able to give you is, I think, encapsulates emotional engagement from a viewer, which I think leads to greater engagement to the particular advert and for that brand. I think the trust that consumers have, I think the credible news organizations, and I think we can proudly say the BBC, we really are at the forefront of being the most trusted news brand out there in the world, and especially in the current context. I think I couldn't emphasize that more. And that's really what the idea was, that we really want brands to, really take over and, be part of that halo effect of operating in a trusted news environment. Yeah. So with that, I think we'd be more than happy to kind of really pick up any questions, queries that you guys will have after this. I think the main focus for us really would be to further emphasize that marketers and brands should look at maintaining or building share of voice during a crisis like this, so that, as and when the economy and businesses recover, you're able to be enjoying some of that success. Obviously, the emphasis again on quality news players and publishers cannot be further reiterated than I already have. And contrary to what many people believe, actually hard news is probably the platform, or probably one of the best engagement driving mechanisms for brands especially during times like this. I think all of us have seen what news viewership has been, as I said earlier in my presentation, in India and across the world. And I really wouldn't want any brands and advertisers to miss out on that. And I think the way the story is playing out, I think it's going to be continuing through most of the year into, I think, the better part of next year as well. Yeah. So on that note, I think we'd like to just sign off, and basically happy to take any questions that Sally and I and our sales director, Vishal Bhatnagar, who's also kind of going to be joining us. So we'll be happy to answer any questions, queries, thoughts, comments that all of you guys or any of you guys may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Shali. And I want to bring in Mr. Vishal Bhatnagar, Sales Director, South Asia, BBC Global News. So there are a few questions. One of the questions is, we spoke about being, Sally, you spoke about, I'll just begin with the later part of it. You said that emotionally being audience is supercharged in this environment. They are kind of accepting, they are listening, right now, and absorbing all the information. In your study, in the study that you showcased for different markets, is there a common link between these markets? Does this apply to all markets in the same way? Is culture a part of it? Like in India, the news environment is completely different than in Australia or anywhere else. Is that news environment also, does it play a role in the way you consume the brand message?
Well, that question actually has three little mini questions. So let me try to address each of them. Common link. I think from, because so far since we launched the Science of Engagement toolkit, we have conducted maybe close to 50, maybe even more neuroscience campaigns, neuroscience tests on campaigns. Compared to the previous campaigns I've seen, the results definitely, like I said in my presentation, there is a sense of seriousness. And in neuroscience terms, that refers to empathy. So across Australia, Singapore, and India, people do show the sense of empathy when they are reading the COVID-related news, which is not a bad thing. I think it's what you expect to see.
Right.
But like I said, it doesn't impact the engagement level. And although I wish I could have conducted the same study across different news sites, but of course it's not possible because I cannot, unless an industry organization, want to found a study like this, we can all chip in and do a test. But because we can only use our news environment to do the test, what we see is that we know that people come to BBC Global News for that breaking news updates, for that trusted and unbiased coverage on the global news matters. So we believe that when they choose to come to BBC, their mindset is already set to be engaged with the content. That alone really helped to show that people are engaged with the content, regardless if it is a positive or negative news story.
Right.
Rohil, I'd like to just pick up
Sure.
something on that as well. I think the emphasis on brand safety, I think cannot be emphasized more, especially in this kind of divided news environment that we are kind of existing in, not just in India, but I think many parts of the world. I mean, the US is a classic example. I think, as I alluded to during my presentation, I think we've seen, how many, over 1,100 brands which are leading this whole Stop the Hate campaign, primarily targeted at Facebook. And I think we've seen some murmurs of that percolate down here into India as well. But I think the parallel I like to draw is really, I think our regular 24/7 Indian news environment, primarily on television. I think it's almost time that we probably emphasize brand safety even on in our local news environment here as well. So I think that's really what we, and in fact, what happened is right when the early days of the pandemic, I mean, just to give you a business analogy, we had platforms like a Tata Sky and an Airtel and other leading cable and satellite platforms and OTT platforms who reached out and said, we want the BBC Now service available to a larger audience. So they actually opened the service up because they said we want them to get authentic, trusted, impartial news rather than all the fake news that is coming with COVID and this is working, this is not working. So that really just goes to show that we even had our business partners who are not clients or agencies here, but our distribution affiliates, who are also a very, very important part of our business, who themselves went ahead and did this, and that led to almost a 35% spike in our overall availability and reach and distribution in this country.
Right. Vishal, this question is for you. There's a subtle agreement, sort of not an official, but a very subtle agreement between marketers. They are behaving in a certain way. For example, being conservative on the spends in the Indian context I'm talking about. And at the same time, I think Rahul also pointed out that those brands which advertise in this crisis may have a greater recall value later. What do you have to say about people who have this conservative approach of kind of waiting till the moment is over? And also there's another fear of not communicating when there is crisis around, when the consumers actually need somebody to be talking to them. So what is your message to marketers? I mean, how would you like to?
I think from our experience with some of the partners who are advertising with us through this period, and what was also borne out by the the research that Sally and Rahul shared is that one, the opportunity, of course, the event itself comes with a certain risk, but also I think what is required is a certain amount of agility. I think, some bit of planning, I think all the scenario plannings that most large organizations go through, preparing themselves for this VUCA world. I think, some of those scenarios have played out. And I think some of the brands that we've been engaging with have seen this opportunity early and seen the value of communicating and staying in touch with their sort of customers, early on, rather than sort of wait for things to pan out and then communicate too late. At the same time, obviously, the communication needs to be thought through. It should not be hurried. It should not be knee-jerk. And that's where, some of our own content team, the Storyworks, BBC Storyworks team, has also come in and helped brands sort of put together a content strategy very quickly in this scenario as well. And that's helped as well.
Right. Rahul, to you, again, the news environment question, the way news is perceived, of course, there's a spike in news consumption and everything else, but the way news is perceived by brands traditionally in India is very different, Has it also impacted the way it's being, does it have a rub-off effect on brands that are not essentially in that space, the way those news channels function? Say your brand, for example, very hard news, So has it kind of a
Hard
rubber
news,
effect?
Ruhail, it's hard news, but with a very soft, empathetic touch.
Absolutely.
You will never see respected or trusted news brands veer into ways of treating. I mean, the way we treat news stories is vastly different to some of how some of the players in India do so. So I think that in itself, and I think that conversation about brands associating themselves, I mean, like the whole debate a couple of years back of you had, YouTube boycott, which happened around, suddenly you had your brand ad pop up right after somebody's viewed a terrorism video or how to make a bomb on YouTube or some pedophile videos, child pornography videos. And there was a huge brand backlash. Likewise, you're seeing the whole Stop the Hate campaign around Facebook as well, where you got, out and out fake news being, allowed to run on the platform. And I think brands finally said enough is enough, and hopefully something comes out of it. I think a similar scenario is the need of the hour in India as well. I think we've seen that. I mean, it is absolutely, I don't know whether I could use a milder word, but it's just completely despicable and disgusting that some of the content that goes out, and it actually, I shudder to think that how could any self-respecting brand even want to associate themselves with the kind of content which goes out there. And, and there are a million examples. I think you literally go from one story to the other and suddenly you have your brand which pops up, or the banner ad is running, or the Aston's running, and you wonder, if I am the brand manager, why would I even want to be associated with this kind of content which is being played out? So I'm sure that conversations are happening around it. And I'm hoping that, this is a trigger for a larger conversation around how brands want to now further go ahead and disengage with themselves with news publishers who kind of make a living off this.
Maybe we have seen one aspect of it on social media, how brands have been responding to social media. Do you think that kind of a response, could happen on a news ecosystem as well, where brand take the responsibility that our content has to be rightly placed?
Honestly, Rohil, to give you a short answer, it's high time. I think that day should have happened in my books many years back. And as you said, in India, we usually need a trigger for something or the other. I think it made all the fairness screen brands wake up, and suddenly they've changed their name from Fair to Glow and all of that kind of stuff. But it obviously is an offshoot of the Black Lives Matter debate and, the whole movement in the Western world. And I'm hoping that the offshoot of the Stop the Hate campaign on social media gives a realization to brands, because I think that's the only way some of the news publishers will mend their ways. Otherwise, I think we'll keep going down this path. And I mean, that's it really. I don't know what else I can really say about that. I think my views are very clear on that.
Sally, to you, my question is that you mentioned that there is higher engagement right now. People they want information, and that too from very credible sources, platforms like yours. Tell me, when they are watching content, news content, hard news, and suddenly a campaign passes on, in this environment wherein you are emotionally supercharged, but in a very different way, you are emotionally maybe on the other side of it, not on the happier side of it. When a brand campaign comes, does the selling part switch them off? I mean, does it go down, that engagement? What happens, with that bit?
Again, I can only speak about our environment. And because, as you can imagine, there's so many different news publishers, and we don't attract the same profile of audience. But for BBC audience, this group of discerning audience, they do discern and they can distinguish content versus brand message. And if the message is relevant, I think to me, it's all about relevance. It's about relevance. So with the latest targeting techniques of ad tag, you can target your audience based on their profile, based on the demographics, and based on other things, to the right kind of programming on TV, or even on online, and sometimes even on TV. As long as it's relevant, it will speak to people.
Right. Vishal, what is how do you see the way forward? For example, we are already in a rebuilding ad revenues are trickling in gradually. Brands are coming
Right.
back. They have, I think, come to terms that we have to live with this environment, and it has to continue, and we have to adjust to it. What do you see happening in the next few months as far as your market sense tells you? I mean, what do you see? Which way would the ad dollar go? How would it behave?
It's hazardous to sort of crystal ball gaze at this stage. But I think the way we are seeing, I think it's also what we've in fact seen in this current month in July. I think people are sort of prepared for it, sort of, to stay in it for the slightly longer run than what people had anticipated. Initially, everybody thought it would be over by, say, June or July and things would be back to normal. I think people have a fair sense that we will need to live with this for some time. I think brands have reconciled. I think the government has allowed economic activity to continue. And I think the consumers, all of us, do still need the products that we need to live. And I think for that, communication does serve the need that it has always served. And I think brands will continue to sort of want to reach out. And I think advertising will continue to sort of, I think, see an uptick. And going forward, I think by the festive period, we see a fair bit of recovery in terms of advertising levels as well. So fingers crossed on that. I think it is looking positive from here on in terms of recovery for advertising.
Rahul, I want your thoughts on the same question. What do you see? Yeah.
Actually, I think just picking up from what Vishal said, also I think keeping in mind probably the best environment would be now, because you probably would be in a clutter-free environment as well. And you do stand out. I mean, I'll give you some prime examples of brands who I initially, when everybody had hunkered down, and I would see the ads for Amul and Shadi.com and some of these brands continued advertising. And then now you see some of their Q1 results as well. You can almost see that those brands kind of just stuck out, and you probably your brand recall was so much higher. Because when everybody was going, you sometimes, as they say, in every crisis there's an opportunity. But I know that these things are easier said than done. When there's a fear psychosis that sets over, it's very difficult for people to come out of that. But I think as human beings, we are wired to kind of live in hope rather than in fear. And I think after the initial fear settles in and people are able to gauge the impact of everything, as you can now see, I mean, we're in a situation where the lockdown is easing in most parts of the country with every given day. But at the same time, I think people are realizing that COVID is here to stay. And now we've just got to manage the situation rather than going to an extreme of again getting into a lockdown. So I think it's really how we've got to find a happy sweet spot and a balance between the two. And as you said, life is going to carry on. Consumers do need, I think the buying will go beyond the essentials and the FMCG products. And I think we will venture out and go ahead and further buy stuff here.
Of course, and with the news of this vaccine kind of, being tested and all of that, I think it will also impact the entire way this crisis is being seen. Maybe
absolutely,
brings back the entire sentiment. There's a question.
Sorry. Many of them, actually, many people may look back at this as a lost opportunity. Honestly, I mean, you really got to look at the glass as half full. I mean, yes, it's been, this is really, if ever the word disruption has to be defined, this has been the ultimate disruption that probably we'll ever see in our lifetimes. But I think the learnings are that, fine, I mean, it's happened. Let's, take it in and let's move on from here.
I have 1 minute, and the question is to you, Rahul, again, and Vishal, you can also share your thoughts. Can this study be offered to other brands as a solution by the BBC? And all of you can take your.
Sally, I think you'd be the best person to answer that query, which is coming from one of the participants.
Can this study be offered to other brands as a solution by the BBC?
Yeah, we are offering this science of engagement study as a toolkit to clients who invest with the branded content production with us. Details you can talk to Vishal. It's possible, basically.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. As you said, we've got a whole branded content division called BBC Storyworks, which engages with brands on end-to-end solutions. And as part of that thing, we do offer, these services are obviously part of that as well.
Right. Sally, there's one final question to you, which is that this study that you showcased today, the neuroscience, toolkit, Is it just relevant for the COVID times? Does it have a bearing? I mean, what is the shelf life of this study? I mean, so as to say.
No, it's definitely not just relevant for the COVID times. We decided to do the study during this time with the case studies. It's because we are curious to find out why people seem to be so engaged with the content, because there is this sense of misconception that brand isn't safe when they are advertising during this time. So we wanted to find out whether or not it is true that people are turned off by the content, the news content. And that is the only reason that we did it at this time. But definitely it has a long shelf life. I hope that we will have budget to do more of these studies during other times, happy or sad times. So, the more studies we done, the more benchmarks we can secure to make it a more robust study.
Right. Last, the Indian environment, news environment inspired comment is 10-second comment from you, Rahul and Vishal. And, final comment, 10 seconds.
I think really, as I said, we are in a 24/7 news environment. I think as news publishers, we literally live from one story to the other. I mean, you literally just kind of lean back and something else happens. So I think you can rest be assured that today, and I think all stories in nature are just not country specific or centric anymore. And I think from a BBC perspective, you can rest be assured that we will be there to closely watch, cover, and bring you, I think, the news coverage and stories from across the world. And hopefully it has the right impact on audiences in India as well.
Vishal, any final comments from you?
I think, this is the kind of situation that all of, management that we've studied, books that we've read, leaders that we've listened to, I think they've all sort of prepared us in a sense for this. And I think, going forward, the news will continue to stay at, an important place to be. I think this situation is still unfolding. People are looking for newer developments, newer guidances to come in. Seeing what's happening globally, I think news will continue to provide safe, secure, and relevant place for brands to engage with audiences. And I think this is definitely a space that needs to continue to sort of look at more carefully.
Sally, would you like to add anything, any comment, closing comment?
No, I don't think I have any more comments. Great. But I really thank you for inviting me to this webinar.
I think, Rohil, I'd like to sign off. Sally is sitting in Taiwan. I think the world needs to emulate the Taiwan story. I mean, really, there's some insights of everything right that Taiwan has done, and the rest of the world needs to just kind of emulate the Taiwan.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot to me to answer that question as a citizen of Taiwan, because we unfortunately we cannot rely on WHO to get the guidance from day one. That's why I think the entire country just gathered together. We started wearing masks from day one. So and it's very important. So I would definitely suggest wearing your mask.
Yeah,
and then just be
safety precautions. Yes.
When you go out. Yeah. Thank you. Please stay safe. And I miss India really a lot. I usually go to India twice a year, and I really miss that trip. So hopefully I can visit all of you in person very soon.
Thank you once again, Rahul, Vishal, and Sally, for this wonderful discussion. And it has been really an insightful one. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rohil. Thank you, everybody at Exchange for Media. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Vishal, guys. Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys who are participating and hearing us out here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.